This is Modern Gaming Culture. This series will attempt to highlight the phenomenon of PC, console, and mobile gaming and bring to light all of its phenomenal aspects. Let's take a dive together into the world of modern gaming and take apart its structure. Now, here's your host, Rotimi Osagi. Alright, this is Modern Gaming Culture. This is the third episode of Modern Gaming Culture. So, last episode, uh, I, you know, I christened that episode, the official first episode of Modern Gamer Culture. And in hindsight, honestly, I liked, that first outtake, right, which I turned into the first episode. But honestly, I think I outdid myself the second time around. Let's just say, I'm saying. um, honestly, I think it was a slam dunk, right? I feel like it was a lot more palatable, right? And a lot more personable, right? Um, than the first episode, right? Which I just decided to make the first episode, right? Honestly, I think it was very well done. Okay, um, again, you're not gonna find stuff like that. In terms of internet radio, you're not gonna find anything like that. I feel like I really knock it out of the park, honestly, when I present, right? Um, it's something I work hard on, right? And so to see the fruits of my labor, right? They're such you know rich fruits, right? It's it's humbling, as well as it is invigorating, right? And astonishing, right? Honestly, I frighten myself how um intelligent I am, honestly. You know, um, you know, you guys are gonna get to know me as we listen to the show, right? But again, something that's going to be a very big mainstay of the show is my, um, railing on the public school system, right? But let's just put that to the side for a second. Talk about talk about me, right? You know, um, throughout my public school um, stint, you know, I you know did a lot of standardized testing, right, as a youth, right? Um, because I showed an aptitude for learning, right, and teaching, as a child, right, and so I did a lot of standard assessing, as a youth, right, but I feel like largely due to um, social economic circumstances and also just you know societal circumstances, right, I was deprived of a lot of those opportunities, right. um, it's not something that hangs over my head too much, right, honestly. Again, as a kid, you don't really know, right, especially when it comes to how the public school system is run, right? You're kind of just along for the ride, right? And so you know, it's not something where it's like it really weighed me down as a child, right? I just knew, that because of my standing in society, I was being deprived of a lot of things, right? Despite those things, you know, should be normally awarded to me, right? Um, and so, again, right, my childhood is filled with astonishment, right? But it just blows my mind how much you know talent I can really um, offer. It really does, honestly, because public school just tries to put you in a box, right? And and then they tell you in university that's when you can think outside the box, right? So I don't know if that's you know really constitutes an argument for public school, right? Just get through public school and then in university you can think outside the box. I don't think so, right? Um, and so it's just like you know public school is incredibly traumatizing because knowing, especially too, that you should be awarded a lot of things, and then because you're basically, you know, can't really. There's not really a code of silence, right? When it comes to school, right? So if you broke your arm, you're coming to school and you got a cast on your arm. Everyone knows you broke your arm, right? And if you're, the next Einstein, you're coming to school. Everyone knows you're the next Einstein, right? So I feel like they did damage to me really as a child, really trying to quantify my intelligence, and then give that you know use that number as validation for praise and stuff like that, right? Um, because not awarding me those things kind of put a target on my back, right? Understanding they basically just put me into a den of vipers, right? Um, you know, it fuels my pet peeve for public school. It really does. Um, but a large part of this show is going to be, you know, um, railing on the public school system, right? Um, but yeah, I feel like in the first episode I was just like, wow, on point, right? I was blown away, right? Um, you know, for these first few episodes, I'm going to be trying to really, strike a balance when it comes particularly to delivery because um, I understand when it comes to this topic, right? People are just not equipped to really receive the typhoon, you know, that they would be hit by. If I really just took the veneer off and really just said what I wanted to say. So, I mean, when it comes to really trying to reel it in, that's something I'm gonna have to be very careful in doing so. I might start sounding like a stroke patient because I be yeah, this stuff is heavy, right? So you know, if if I sound like your 90-year-old grandma who just came back from again, there's a hospital around here, Humber River, and the 14th floor is where they deal with stroke patients. So if I sound like your 90-year-old grandmother, right, who just came off the 14th floor, right, of Humber River, right, it's because I'm really trying to you know reel it in, right. So um, again, right, you're not gonna find anything like this on internet radio these days, right? You have largely people who, if they even know what happened in the mid 2010s, right, it's just a distant memory to them, right? And then you have internet celebrity, internet overnight celebrity, you know, of the season, right? Um, and then you have fake ass everybody, right? People who are just, posers, right? People who are whatever they're trying to embody or portray in name only, right? And then you have, you know, your points not turning um, of the you know of the week, right? So you come to modern game culture and you're just like, wow, right? I mean, you're just in awe, right? And that's what gaming is. That's a large part of being part of the gaming arena, right? Is posture, right? You know, um, posture is going to be something we're going to be talking about a lot about on this show, right? This show's about gaming culture, right? And so we're going to be covering the ins and outs of gaming culture, right? Whether it be posturing, right? You know, slights, etc. Right? So you come to the show and you're just going to be like, wow, right? And you're just not going to know what it is. You're just going to be like, anytime I listen to Rotimi, right? You know, long form relative to the segmented, you know, fragmented diatribe that you'll receive from you know um, gaming culture. I mean, not from gaming culture, from internet radio, right? Um, and then you come on. Well, it's long form, right? And just like he doesn't cease to amaze me, right? It's just like he just hits it. I just don't know what it is about this guy, right? Why haven't I heard of this guy before, right? You know, I need to tell the whole world about this guy. Oh my gosh, have you heard of Rotimio Sagi, right? And it's that's why, right? Um, these are for the people we're trying to reach, right? People understand these dynamics, right? Um, and for the people that I'm trying to reach, we need to have that you know discussion, right? For the people not trying to reach who are just listening for whatever the fuck reason you're listening for, first of all, you should just tune out, right? Um, Second of all, I have choice words for you, right? And third of all, you should just tune out because, you know, um, you know, I'm not your friend, right? This is not something that's here just for, an intellectual curiosity, or some sort of test of faith or some sort of gauntlet, right? Or, an event that you're just like interested in and you're like RSVPing on your profile, right? This is for the strong. And again, right, if you're not preparing yourself to listen to the show, right, you're gonna find it increasingly and increasingly more difficult to listen to what I'm saying, right? So, um, people when it comes to gaming culture, right, um, are very um stuck in their ways when it comes to viewing it, right? And it largely comes from a lot of societal influences from the exterior, right? And it gets extra amplified because in gaming culture, you just don't have the warriors that are fighting in a lot of different arenas, right? And so you enter the arena of gaming culture, and things seem insurmountable, and they are. Okay, newsflash. Okay, um, if you think you're just gonna hop on to a game and then you're just gonna take over, I mean, good luck. Okay, because I'm gonna be meeting you on the other side of that P, right? The PvP um, equation. and you're going to oblivion where you belong. Okay? All right. Um, excuse me. You know, this show doesn't constitute just me turn on the webcam and just pointing it at myself and then just talking for 20 or 30 minutes. The show represents months and months of preparation. Right. I'm not unfamiliar with the arena of internet publishing. Right. By no stretch of the imagination. Right. And so you know I hold myself to a very high standard. Right. And a lot of people just hold themselves to no standard. Right. And so as a result, right, um, you know, my work sort of seems degraded, right, even from the jump, right. And again, a lot of these dynamics I'm talking about are to blame, right. People are just not picking up the ball for this stuff, right. People are still talking about long COVID, right, on internet radio these days, right. And it's like they wiped out all of your fucking teammates, right. You know, 4 or 5 years before COVID, was even shout out, right? And so, I mean, your teammates are just looking at you, and you're like, you're not even honoring us in any way, shape, or form, right? I mean, people were ridiculed, mocked, and just absolutely devastated, right? In the mid 2010s, then you want to turn on, your camera, right, and then talk about long COVID, right? Okay, right? Like the people who really fought, you know, to make um, life possible here in the West, right? Um, to the level of comfort and convenience that we have it, right? Would take a dump on your forehead, you know, if they were alive today, right? You know, the sacrifices these guys have made, these men and women made, right? None of us can envision that level of sacrifice. None of us, right? It is not something that should be taken with a grain of salt, right? You know, and so in this era, right, where stuff is so accessible, right, and so readily available, right, the way people are really taking these issues very nonchalantly at best, it's unacceptable, right? And again, I'm not talking about the people who I'm trying to reach. Right? I'm talking about the people, you know, who may be, following these people along, right? You know, at arm's length, right? And have all these excuses to make about why they're not doing anything, right? You know, people really want to just, um, again, right? These are things that we're going to be talking about on Game of Modern Culture. Right? People who are just not really, um, even seeking the big picture, let alone putting the big picture together, right? Um, but then causing a lot of issues for the people who are, either seeking to put the big picture together or trying to put the big picture together, right? And then the people who are, at the front lines, like me, right, who, have the biggest responsibility, right, the most to lose, right, um, and put my neck out the most, right, and then having to, cater to this, you know, imbecility, right? It's just incredulous to me, right? Um, like how could you be so unequipped, right, to even provide assistance, let alone take up arms and shoot back at the enemy, right? That's the type of ridicule you're going to be getting from modern gamer culture, right? Um, I don't need to temper it, you know, any other way. That is the sort of monotone, laid back, nonchalant, systematic take apart of your diatribe you call an excuse that you're going to get, right? And that's another reason why you're not going to find, you know, internet radio like this out on the airwaves these days, right? It's because people want to cater to people's delicate sensibilities, and I'm not going to really do that. I'm trying to reach people, right? And I'm not going to let anybody stop me from reaching those people, right? So, you know, if you expect me to, as they say in the Boondocks, have a nigger moment, right? Um, and if you want to echo that sentiment, um, you're free to do so. Okay, we're not going to be censoring people here, telling people you can't say certain words because you're not a certain race. You want to tell people they're a nigger. Doesn't matter if you're black, white, brown, green, yellow, whatever. Tell people they're a nigger. Okay, I'm not going to sit here and have a nigger moment. I'm not going to sit here and throw my hands up in the air, be like, oh, blah, blah, and just name names. I'm going to reach the people who I'm trying to reach. Nothing's going to stop me doing that. Right? I want to talk about what I was talking about, in the last episode regarding expanding on a lot of these, you know, dynamics I've been talking about, largely with, um, you know, the internet censorship wave that occurred in the early 2010s, right? Um, and what I consider the internet dark age, right? People um, were not equipped for that internet censorship wave, and when I say it devastated the arena of internet radio, right, and internet publishing, I mean it demolished it, right? And so, you know, I can't stop harping about it, right? Because it has gotten literally like zero coverage, right? I mean, people are wondering why things are so hard, right? And then why people seem like they're so bailed out, by you know a Republican, especially someone who's had such public um, love as Donald Trump, right? And why, despite that, Donald Trump isn't just you know overhauling you know the whole system, right? And it's like, man, if you think that the solutions, this song I listened to called Paper Mates by this group from the late '90s and early 2000s, um, called Sign. Right? It's spelled CYNE. They have this song called Paper Mate. The song they um, they sample. They have a sample, and it's that it goes. The solutions you seek will not be in the stroke of a pen. Right? You know, it's not. You know, I mean, if you think that somehow, Donald Trump is just gonna, steer America back into this direction of revolution or progress, right? Single handedly, just by getting him elected, right, in 4 years, right? I mean, my God, I mean, what planet do you live on, right? Um, you know, I think you might be harnessing the technology, you know, to escape this universe, right? Because that is a very brilliant overview of the situation, you know, that we find ourselves in the West, right? Um, you know, um, you know, you really need to get us up to speed on that technology because that's very you know um, high tech software that you're really working with, right? Um, so this is something that's very important. Okay, um, I mean when you talk about devastation, right? Like people, when it comes to understanding what they really need to do to take up arms and shoot back at the enemy, I mean, my God, okay, like people live in our houses. Okay? People who make the personal computer look like sticks and stones. Okay, I mean, you don't have to go as far as your home, most people, right, to really find you know um, just a complete and total unpreparedness to tackle the issue at hand when it comes to gaming culture, right? Um, you know, part of gaming culture, right, is understanding sequencing, right? Sequencing is an incredibly complex topic, right, that really gets very much oversimplified, right, by a lot of these titles that are on the market, right? Particularly when it comes to trading card games, right? Um, but sequencing, right, is a very important um, skill set to really procure to be part of gaming culture, right? So, that's something we're going to be talking about. Sorry, the colossal skill sets that you really need to, you know, tackle this issue when it comes to gaming culture. Right? So, before I continue, right, I just want to, air out a little dirty laundry when it comes to, um, you know, doing, a lot of this presenting, right? Um, you know, again, this show doesn't represent, me just coming on and just pointing a camera at myself. I prepared months in ahead, just for this show alone, right? And so, the thing I liked about internet radio, right, when it was really a burgeoning field, right, was that there was just so much material to really consume, right? And so, that censorship wave really did a number when it comes to really um, trying to really gauge the direction that internet radio should go, right? You know, you would have people who would, sometimes they would put 3 videos up a day. Some people still do that, you know. Um, some people, would do like a video, right, and then they do a video like 2 days later, right? Um, you know, and I understand largely these people were just, taking a crack at it, right? They weren't really, at the tip of the spear when it comes to a lot of the issues that they were talking about, right? It's just they have that capacity to just do those things naturally, so they did those things, right? And so um, with preparing for the show, I really was, trying to really gauge, you know, sort of how I should approach, you know, internet radio, right? And understanding that, people who are part of internet radio these days, right? Um, you know, if material aside, are very structured, and that's something we'll talk about too on modern gaming culture. But you know, I have to respect that, and not just try to make this an echo chamber, right? Um, which it's gonna feel like because of how ahead of the curve I am when it comes to the topics, which I'm going to be discussing, right? And so things like structure, right, scheduling, etc., right, are important, right? But I think that you know um, I want to sort of in the spirit of what internet radio was becoming, right? Still try to keep that sort of classical internet radio feel, right? Where you can just turn on your video hosting platform, you know, uh, and that you use, right? And scroll through, and oh my gosh, Rotimi just dropped another episode of Modern Gamer Culture, right? And it's like, oh my gosh, he dropped an episode like 3 days ago, though, right? So that is something that I feel like should be revived, as well, um, as well as internet radio as a profession being revived, or attempted to be revived through this show, right? Try to revive that sort of invigoration that you kind of receive, right, when somebody is you know eagerly delivering material to an audience, right? So you know maybe I'll do 2 episodes at a time. You know, maybe I'll do like 6 episodes. Maybe I'll do an episode, and then 2 days later I'll do another episode, and I'll do like 4 episodes. Right? You um, as well as the fact that we have to discuss, right, in earnest, right, the internet censorship wave, right, of the mid 2010s, right. Also a lot of you know, um, food on our plate, you know. So, we need to um, respect that as well. So this is gonna be very cool because if I want to do like 6 episodes at a time, right, and just do an episode, an episode rush, right? Maybe you'll get like 6 episodes, right, and then I'll just spend the day um, doing post production, right, um, and putting them up, right. I think that would be really cool, right? So they as I just say, there's more than one way to skin a fish, So or descale a fish if you prefer, right? But yeah, right? So I think um, you know, and so you know, understand I want to reach people, right? But at the same time, I also understand that you also have to respect, you know, um, the people, who are in the fields, right? This is something that's very common in music, right? People who are entering the arena of um, music production, right? And they really have a sound that they've really refined, right? And they identify the genre, which would be most suited to target, right? But they also understand that with entering the arena of music is also understanding, niche, right? And so, you know, it's like, as much as I want to, really tailor this to the gaming culture community, I also understand, the milieu, right? Um, of, internet radio hosts, internet radio shows that they have out there. And so, this can't just be, you know, turn into a steaming echo chamber, right? So, um, you know, but the show is also not going to become a show about current events or, gossip. I'm not here to make enemies either, right? I'm not here for people to somehow try, again, right? A critic is someone who it can never do what they are trying to critique. Right? I'm not trying to make this show a, a shit spewing, you know, target, right? For people who are trying to sort of discredit my work for the sake of crediting their work somehow. I don't know how that works, right? Um, and or try to make a name for themselves out of discrediting my work. Again, right? The proverbial token black person, right, is a very generally a very easy target when it comes to this phenomenon of internet trolling, right? And so especially considering how you know um, novel my material is going to be, right? And how when it even comes to the reception of it, right, and the integration of a lot of the concepts, I'm gonna really going to be discussing on the show. Understanding those concepts are not really going to be understood by the general public, right? Um, understand I'm going to be a very easy target for people, right? Because of just how much I stick out, right? And so, you know, um, you know, I'm not going to just, you know, this show is not going to be about, somehow trying to enter into the, a lot of circles that, they call it the life wave, or, if you want to talk about, story structure, entering a narrative, right? You know, or if you want to talk about, biology, proliferation, right? Or, general, colloquialisms, such as, public consciousness, you know, the arena, so to speak, right? Um, this is not what I'm going to be trying to attempt to do. You know, you know, when you stand in the truth, right? You have to be ready to stand in the minority of one, right? And so, you know, this is not going to be something where I'm going to be trying to, garner attention or something like that, right? I'm just going to be trying to do what I'm trying to do, right? That's going to be it, right? And if people want to try to associate me with things I'm not going to be associated with, I'm going to try my best to spell that stuff. I'm going to try my best to make sure people can't do that, right? A lot of stuff I'm going to be doing to, make sure people can't just, discredit my work flippantly, right? You know, and then also, understanding, trying to gauge, the reach, that I'm gonna have, right? Um, all this stuff, right, needs to be taken into consideration, right, when it comes to um, just getting on the air, right? So, those things are just gonna have to respect, right? Um, but one thing that's a really a big driver, I would say, right, for these first few episodes is understanding just how much you know um, influencers really dropped the ball when it came to the censorship wave. You know, I mean, you guys got completely and totally, in the circles I kind of, you immerse myself in. We call that getting dummied, right? I mean, you guys got dummied by um, these, totalitarians, right? Like your buddies who were echoing your clarion call got completely flash vaporized by these censorship pundits, and you didn't even give them a moment of silence. I mean, you guys think that you guys are winning. You guys think that the tide is turning. You think seasons are changing, and you're just fucking wrong. People are just turning in their graves, right? Turning, tossing and turning in their beds over how devastated they got, and you're just counting your dough. Just count your dough. Count your dough. Count your dough. Oh yeah, these guys want to give me, a an endorsement. These guys want to sponsor me. These guys want to promote my content, right? Right. A lot of these people, these are like your neo Christians, right? You know, and their book says that the love of money is the root of all evil, right? What does a man profit it if he gains the world and he loses his soul, right? Um, you know, it would be easier for a rich man, to go through the eye of a needle. It would easier for a camel to go through the eye of a needle than it would be for a rich man to enter heaven, the kingdom of God, right? You know, you can't worship God and mammon, right? You can't serve two masters, right? Because you love one and despise the other, right? You can't serve God and mammon, right? It goes on, right? And these guys dare fly the flag of Christianity alongside, this complete money worship festival, right? It's just it's painful, it's tragic, right? And this is first few episodes of this first iteration of modern game culture is gonna serve to honor those people because these people did not receive you know the honor that they deserve. A lot of these people, again, their work was not mirrored anywhere, right? Their work wasn't backed up, and so it's been completely wiped. You have to probably, use some sort of, you know, Internet Archive service software, or going like way back, um, way back machine, I think it's called, Internet Archive, right? Or somehow if it's archived somewhere in the dark web, right? Um, which search engines can't really access, right? Because they don't have an index, right? Which constitutes 90% of the internet, right? Up towards 90% of the internet, right? Um, these people didn't really receive you know the honor that they deserve, right? So I think like a large part of this first iteration of the first few episodes of the show is going to be trying to honor these people because these people who claim to be flying the flags of freedom and liberty, right? And who are really just wolves in sheep clothing when it comes to you know their harnessing the solution to you know um, manifesting those conditions, right? Um, is a pity, right? It's pathetic, right? And I have choice words for it, right? Um, and so people just need to just be put in their place. Honestly, a lot of people have tried to do that, right? And I'm just going to be echoing that sentiment, right? Um, you know, I even hesitate to really call this internet radio, um, because of the fact that it's going to conjure up images, of all these so-called internet radio show hosts that you have these days, right? Who, you know, couldn't find their ass with both hands, right? And a flashlight, right? So, um, yeah, I think I'm going to leave it there for the former part of this episode, right? To conclude, you know, um, you know, things are going to get somber on this show, right? This show's about gaming culture, right? But things can get sad, right? And this is a part of gaming culture, understanding how to lose gracefully, you know, because winning isn't hard, right? Accepting that you won particularly isn't hard, right? That's where you get the proverbial sore winner, right? The pathetic winner, right? Um, Losing is really what you need to master, right? And so, it shows about gaming culture, right? But if things get a little somber, right, you know, that's just the hand you've been dealt, right? We're gonna get into a lot about these titles, that we really have, you know, um, at our, disposal these days, right? Um, and understanding, navigating them and stuff like that, right? And so, it may seem like it's all sunshine and rainbows, right? And we're gonna get into that as well on the show, right? But there's a lot more than meets the eye, right? So, you know, I think I'll close it there, right? This episode of Modern Gamer Culture. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you.